Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the Cryptoverse. I figured we might as well do a live stream and we will talk about the market, see what's going on, see if you guys have any questions. Um, Let me post this in a few different places and then we will jump in. So, all right. So, pretty boring market recently, right? Not a whole lot going on. We basically just been chilling at 47K, 48K for a week now. Couple plus or minus a couple $1,000s, right? What's a couple $1,000s among friends? So not a huge change in the markets right now. And one of the things we can look at is we'll sort of look at the macro scale, right? Of course, the daily time frames looks awful. Um, looking at daily time frames, we're in a downtrend right now, okay? And we need to break that downtrend, all right? Some people are, they're claiming we're going to break out to 100K at any moment. But look, we first need to break the downtrend, and until that happens, I wouldn't get overly optimistic. I would just say, all right, let's break the downtrend first. Once we break the downtrend, then we need to go sideways for a while. It's certainly possible that this is the beginning of the sideways movement, but it's also completely too early to call that yet. It's so early. It's way too early, I think, to call that at this point. So what we can do is look at larger time frames and say, well, what are the larger time frames telling us? Are they how do they look okay? Do they look bad? Do they look good? Well, if you look at monthly candles, it's an interesting perspective, right? And one of the reasons is because you can see that we've more or less just been holding this resistance up here in this pretty narrow range on monthly candle closes, okay? Right up there. And, one of the interesting things is that we've seen these types of formations on smaller time frames. Have we not? We have. If we go look at say, let's go look at Bitcoin, and let's delete that on this chart, and then we'll go to the daily time frame. I believe we had some type of similar structures when we were at 20K, all right, but it happened on a much smaller time frame, okay, and you can see what I'm talking about. You just take that general window of time that we're looking at, and looking at it on the daily time frame. What you notice is that it was more or less the same thing, but it took place on much smaller time frames. So we came up to just below 20K, we got rejected. We came up, we put in a new all-time high, well, a new local high, not necessarily a new all-time high, just shy of a new all-time high on most exchanges, I believe. But what ultimately happened? Despite the fact that at the very least we had a new local high, we ended up going back down. But what's interesting is we didn't actually go all the way back down to where we were earlier in November. Okay, so we went down, what, about, the second time we went down, it was about 8% higher than the first time. So, but again, you see a similar pattern, right? Rejection 1, rejection 2. Us crypto investors, we know how to get rejected, right? And then it was the third attempt that sent us on our way to ultimately much higher prices. And of course, the rest is history. I mean, once we broke through the prior all-time high decisively, we look back and we know what happened after it, right? We went on an absolutely parabolic journey that took us all the way to 64K. And then you could argue that we are potentially repeating this type of move, right? We're potentially repeating this type of move, but on a much longer time frame, okay? A monthly time frame. So if you go look at monthly candles, you kind of see something similar, right? We got rejected at 64K. We got rejected at a slightly higher price. Technically, we put in a new high, but I mean, again, it was price discovery mode for ants. if you had sold at 64K, it's not like it's a huge difference between selling at 64K in April and selling at say 69K in November. Not a huge difference, right? No one's getting out of bed for it to go up a few $1,000s. So you could argue that we're seeing some type of similar type moves, but on a longer time scale. All right, and I mean, when you're talking about these monthly time frames, it really is easy to sort of lose sight of these overall market trends. And I know a lot of people are calling for a bear market. Okay, a lot of people are saying we're in a bear market, and I sort of learned a lesson back in the summer. I called it a 3 to 6 month bear market, and then crypto Twitter ripped me a new one for having the audacity to even mention the word bear. But look, bull markets are characterized by uptrends. Bear markets are characterized by downtrends, and you could easily make the case that if you look at Bitcoin over a 10-year period, it's just been in one macro bull market, right? It's just been in one long macro bull market. Of course, you zoom in to shorter time frames, we know that it's sprinkled in with these bear markets that can last a year. Over the summer, we said, look, it's going to be about a 3 to 6 month summer lull or bear market back then, and it was. I mean, you can't say that going from 64K to 29K was extremely bullish at the time, but what it ultimately led to is we consolidated at 30K, and then we pushed higher to new all-time highs, and then we retested the prior all-time highs. So they're not a bad thing. I mean, I don't really consider downtrends to be that bad. Generally speaking, downtrends usually precede uptrends for Bitcoin, if history is any indication. I look at the market today, and I say it could be repeating some type of similar pattern. You guys know my thoughts on the matter. Predicting what's going to happen in the short term is extremely difficult. I have no idea if we already hit the bottom at 42K. I don't know if we're going to go to 40K. I don't know if we're going to go to 30K. But I would argue that whatever we're going to do, I still think we're going to ultimately push higher, and we're not going to have to wait, 3 years to do so, right? We're not going to have to wait until 2024, in my opinion. Okay. Maybe my ignorant opinion, but it's my opinion, and I'm right. I'm allowed to have one. I don't think we're going to have to wait 3 years before we're going to get another crack at those prior all-time highs. So, what happens in the short term for me is largely irrelevant. I would argue again that we should be able to ultimately press back up against these prior all-time highs. But I would like people to have the right perspective on it, right? Not to assume that it's going to happen this month, okay? Because I also hear a lot of people say, well, we have to rally back to 60K, we have to go back to 70K by the end of the month, otherwise we're doomed. Why? I don't think so. I don't really think that makes that's going to play out in the sense that if we don't make it to 60K, we're doomed. I think that would be somewhat absurd. I think that if you look at the monthly candles. Okay, if you look at the monthly candles and we, are just somewhat realistic about what are a potential timeline here, I think we're going to retest these. Is it going to be this month? Probably not, right? It's probably not going to be this month. There's also a good chance that it won't even be next month either. But I think sometime in 2022, we should be able to retest these highs and then hopefully break through. And one of the things we've discussed for a long time, is that these moves, these price moves by Bitcoin at these levels have not, again, they haven't been that impressive, okay? 2021, we've just been stuck at 30 to 60K, and I know some people say, well, you're going to minimize a 2x move, like 30 to 60K. I'm not trying to minimize anything. I'm just saying, look, I mean, it's just 30 to 60K is where we spent 99 or 95% of the year. And that's sort of just background volatility for Bitcoin. If you look at any year for Bitcoin, you're more or less going to see that type of volatility at a minimum for most years, I imagine. 2020, we were at a low of 3,800 all the way up to like 29,000 by the end of the year. So that's a lot more than a 2x. In that was 2020. In 2019, we hit a low. I mean, the 3100 low was in 2018, but in 2019 we were around those those $4,000 levels, and we also went up to $14,000, which was much more than a 2x. Okay, it was over a 3x back in 2019, and 2019 wasn't really a bull market. I mean, it was sort of like a mini bull market, but it wasn't. No one was getting out of bed for a price that was still well below the prior all-time high. So 2018 was characterized by prices that went as low as $3,100. And we know that at the very beginning of 2018, Bitcoin was still trading for some, around, I don't remember exactly what it was when we started that year it looks like we hit a high of around $17,000. So we were between, say, $17,000 and $3,100 in 2018. So, I've seen the comments where people say, well, you're minimizing it if you say it's only between 30 and 60K. Look, I mean, in terms of volatility for Bitcoin, for it to only be for the majority of the year, for it to only be between 30 and 60K, or if you wanted to really look at the extremes, like 29K to 69K, that's actually pretty tame, even compared to relatively uneventful years over the last several years. It's actually relatively tame. And you might even be hard-pressed to find a year that had as low a volatility. We know that 2017 was extremely volatile for Bitcoin. And even 2016, at some point during the year, we were at $371. By the end of the year of 2016, we were almost at $1,000. So you're still looking at roughly equivalent, if not more volatility than 2021. So as I've said, for the entire year, 2021 is more or less a sideways year for Bitcoin, between 30 and 60K. And we can try to come up with ways to make it, make it seem like it's more than it is. But look, it's been a relatively uneventful year for Bitcoin. And I think part of it, and I'll probably make a video on this later, is this mentality. And this was something I heard back when I was a postdoc, actually. But it's the mentality of hurry up and wait, right? Especially if you're dealing with bureaucracy or anything like that. The mentality is, by the way, if you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up. You guys know the drill. But the idea, right, is hurry up and wait. It's like people realize back over here that, oh, wait, maybe there's something to this whole Bitcoin thing. Right? There's something to it. And it's like everyone jumps on board. But instead of continuing this rally, and instead of coming back down, it can be best characterized by hurry up and wait. And we came from these lows of $3,800 all the way up to 60K, and we've just been range bound ever since. So I think that is a good way to describe Bitcoin in especially leading into 2021, the very end of 2020, and then going into 2021. I think this market cycle could best be characterized as hurry up and wait. And we're going to be waiting a while, okay? I don't think we're about to end this waiting period. I do think it will come to an end at some point, hopefully, and in 2022, where we can take a crack at the prior all-time highs. But one of the things I think is important for success in crypto is patience, right? I mean, that's just what it is. Like, I think patience often is what you need. And this goes for the people that were around in 2019 and 2018. One of the common complaints I've seen by the crypto class of 2021 is, they always say, well, too bad we didn't get in early, right? Too bad we didn't get. Look, I guarantee you that the people that made a lot of money in 2020 and 2021, a lot of those people, and maybe if you're in the chat, you can drop a note saying you were one of those people. A lot of those people that made a lot of money were ones that felt like they were late back in 2017 and felt like in 2018 and 2019 we were never going to happen again. And then it did. Okay, so I don't mean to, like, I'm not a therapist. I'm not. I mean, if you have a problem with the markets, then build a bridge and get over it. I don't really care. But the point is at the end of the day, if you can't be patient in crypto, then it's just simply not a market for you, right? It's just simply not a market for you. And you have to consider that in the future, it's not going to be tomorrow. Well, tomorrow is the future, but when you think about the grand scheme of being early, right? If you think about being early, the people that tend to enjoy the gains later on are the people that wait, okay? The people that are patient, the guys that have a plan and they stick to it. And they don't sway from it because Bitcoin drops a certain amount over a short period of time. And you have to be prepared for the downside volatility. I'm not going to sit here and tell you Bitcoin's going to go up monotonically because it's not. And it can get pretty brutal at times. But the people that ultimately win out are the people that wait, okay? This is why I said back over here when new participants were coming into the market and they were asking me like what to buy, and I was like, what are you talking about? Like this is a time when I'm selling, right? I was taking profits back in April, back in March, back in February. People were signing up to the premium list. Like, oh, what are you buying? I'm like, I'm not buying anything right now, except for maybe some stocks. I mean, like when you spend 3 years accumulating crypto and it goes up 30x in a year, you have to draw the line somewhere. So, but then now after we had this massive retracement back down to these levels, then you get into this mentality again. Okay, we've had a retracement of 55%. Seems reasonable to start accumulating again, and then you go back to the same type of mentality that 2019 was, where you have this volatility, and you can imagine what 2019 felt like if you weren't around crypto in 2019. This is what we saw. Okay, so just put yourself in our shoes back in 2019. Like this is what we saw. Okay, and there was a lot of euphoria at 14K, and actually it was actually relatively confusing, because I didn't have a YouTube channel at the time, but I certainly had more than a few models that I was using to try to navigate things, and I wasn't expecting 14K in the summer of 2019. I was not expecting that. I guarantee you, most people that were looking at a $3,100 Bitcoin at the end of 2018 would not have thought that over the next, say, 6 months or so, Bitcoin would go up 4x in 6 months, like 4x in a relatively short period of time. And it did, right? And it did. And it seemed like, everyone was on top of the world again, and we're going back up. And then we bled, right? And then we bled for a while. And we had a nasty shakeout in March of 2020 that took us all the way back down to these prior levels. And it seemed kind of crazy at the time. One of the reasons that was crazy was because we actually went below the 200-week moving average. And we don't often go below the 200-week moving average, right? If we go look at weekly candles, it was a scary time in the market for a lot of people. And maybe some of you guys were around the crypto markets back then. I remember, I think I was live for part of it. I was definitely active in the chat rooms when it happened. But we went all the way down to the 200-week moving average. And what was interesting is we actually had a wick down to the 300-week moving average at the time. So it was pretty scary. It was pretty scary. And honestly, I mean, when you have these models where you're trying to talk about these regression bands and everything, we went below it, right? We went below it. It's like, well, is that it, right? Is that it for the regression bands, or are we going to go on some other type of price growth now for Bitcoin that is completely different from what we've seen? We've seen some assets do that. I mean, it's not like Bitcoin has to stay on this logarithmic regression curve forever, but we rebounded and we quickly came back to the quote unquote fair value region, which is fit to just non-bubble data. We came back up to the top and then back down. And now we're just in no man's land, right? We're just simply in no man's land. So again, looking at what happened in 2019, this is what we saw. We came down, but look, I mean, it didn't take. I mean, it was what? It was a year later, right? It was a year. That was a full year later, and we pressed higher, and the rest was history. Okay, and so now we find ourselves not necessarily in the same circumstance, right? It's not exactly the same circumstance. But the point is if you can't handle short-term volatility, then this market just simply isn't for you. And there's really no other way to say it. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen next month. We could go much further down than we are. We could be back at 60K. But the point is the people that do the best in crypto are generally the people that they figure out a time in the market that makes sense to DCA, what makes the most sense for them. Obviously, for a lot of people that were following this YouTube channel in 2019 and 2020, they were DCAing. You get this crazy bubble at the end of 2020 going into early 2021, and it's crazy, right? And you understand the sell pressure. I mean, everyone was up. Some people were up 100x, right? I mean, even some of the coins we talked about, ADA was up 100x. Ethereum was up. I mean, what it was at 80. It was it was $100 earlier in the cycle, even less than $100. It went to over $4,000. So maybe even almost a 50x, right? Because it was at $80. We know it went over to $4,000. So we're talking about a 50x move or so by Ethereum, which again, it was number 2 in the asset class, right? It is number 2. 50x in a relatively short period of time. So there's no really surprise that we had the summer lull that we talked about. I know it was not a popular theory, but there's really no surprise that it happened. You have a lot of selling pressure, right? Now, that selling pressure took us down. We got it again, though. It's same selling action again when we came up to these levels again. So you have to imagine that, let's suppose the lengthening cycle theory that we've been talking about for years now, let's suppose it plays out, okay? So it's dubious speculation, but this is what I think would happen, is that eventually, like, lengthening cycles hopefully plays out. We put a new all-time high sometime in 2022, and then imagine that scenario. What's going to happen? Like, what would people be thinking then? Okay, so like, let's just imagine some scenario where we don't really care what happens in this range, and let's suppose we get back up somewhere over here to these prior levels. So we have these sort of like macro view on the market, these monthly candles. We test it once, rejected. We test it twice, rejected. We test it a third time. Hopefully we make it through. Let's imagine something like this plays out, okay? And we declare victory on lengthening cycles, whether we go down and then up, or if we just go up now. I don't really care. But let's suppose something like this happens and we break through. It's going to be an interesting time in the market if that happens, because, I mean, I can say it now because it's not happened yet, so people might actually listen to me. But one thing that I could imagine that would happen is that people will likely think that there are not going to be any major bear markets for Bitcoin again. Why? Because there's so many people that have this 4-year cycle theory ingrained in their head that if 2022 offers something that is not just down only, then people are going to think that we are in some type of different thing for Bitcoin, and that it's simply simply going to go to 500K or something ridiculous. I'm not saying that you guys are going to think that. I'm just saying I feel like a lot of market participants might think that. They're just going to call it a super cycle. And I would argue that there is a difference between a super cycle and a lengthened cycle. I think a super cycle more or less just supposes that the price of Bitcoin is just going to keep going up forever, and we're not going to have any major bear markets. But think about this, okay? Think about this. The selling pressure over here, okay, the selling pressure here was significant, okay? And you had all these guys over here selling, right? Yeah, well, a lot of people were selling. Right, why not? I mean, you can't blame them, right? I feel like you can blame them for selling. But here's the thing, right? You have these guys that sold over here. You also have some of the same guys that didn't sell over here that sold over here. They got a second chance, right? Now, let's suppose, hypothetically speaking, that we actually break through it and we go on some journey upwards, okay, like that, all right? And then, not only at this point, if we make it to these levels, right, up somewhere up here, not only would you have the guys that bought down here that didn't take profits here, not only are you going to have them wanting to sell and push the price down, but you're also going to have the crypto class of 2021, potentially, that came in over here, right? They're going to want to sell too. And, if the lengthened cycle plays out, which again, this is a theory we've had for several years on the channel, it has not been proven yet. We have to wait and see, right? We just don't know yet. We have to wait until next year to see, because it's not going to be proven this year. We technically lengthened from the halving, but again, the theory was not based on the halving. It's based on the market cycle bottom, and we have not put any new all-time high as measured from the market cycle bottom yet. So, with that in mind, not only would you have the guys over here selling, but you're going to have the guys over here selling as well. And it's at that point that I don't think the market could bear it anymore, right? I just simply do not think the market could bear it. And I don't know if it's going to happen in 2022. I've said for years that this cycle could go all the way out even until 2023. There is some dubious speculations that if you take, if you look at an Arrhenius plot and you look at 1 over time, and you look at peak 1, peak 2, peak 3, and peak 4 as a function of time, and you fit it to a curve, it looks something like this. And then if you get those peaks, and this is 1 over time, and you extrapolate that function, again, it's very dubious indeed, and any mathematician will tell you that the uncertainty on this is sky high, and it is. But if you did something like that, it actually puts the fourth peak, the fourth macro peak, believe it or not, right? Believe it or not. And by the way, maybe people could believe it now, because look, all the quote-unquote experts that were calling for a blow-off top in Q4, they were all wrong, right? They're all wrong. Certainly if 69K were the market cycle top, most people did not say 69K was going to be the top. So forget what you think you know in terms of the 4-year cycle, right? And what if the next peak is in the summer of 2023? Because that's what this model would say, is that it would be in the summer of 2023, which seems crazy. I would argue it could come before then. It could be in 2022. But if it does come in 2022, I don't think it's going to be at the very beginning of 2022. So I've seen some people sort of just, they move the goalpost on their prediction, right? They take it from December, and then they just move it to January. And then they're going to take it from January, and then they'll move it to February. And then they'll make it from February, and then they'll move it to March. And they'll just keep doing it, right? What else are they going to do, okay? So you have to think that if something like that plays out, then people are going to be confused, and that's the way the market has to be. You can't have 90% of crypto investors saying, "Oh yeah, December 2021 is going to be the blow off top. We're all going to sell." Who are you going to sell to if everyone's expecting it, right? If literally everyone seems like, all right, this could be the time, who are you going to sell to? Who's buying, right? Who's buying at that phase? If every investor is watching this play out, and they think it has to go this way. By the way, I've been adamant that we're likely not going to have a Q4 parabolic rally in 2021 for a long time. It's been hyped beyond belief since 2018. I'm glad that it's almost behind us. I just want to move on to 2022, look at 2021 as just a sideways year, move on, move past it, show that this idea that we have to go parabolic every Q4, 2013, 2017, 2021, 2025, 2029, is not going to happen endlessly, okay? So that's sort of what I'm thinking. This is if the lengthening cycle plays out, right? This is if the lengthening cycle plays out. You have to imagine that some people are just going to think there's going to be no macro bear markets. I think there would, unfortunately, right? I wish there weren't. I wish that we could just go straight to $1 million, but it's just likely not going to happen. If Bitcoin does prove the bears wrong and we have a lengthened cycle, which again is what I think, then I think we'll reach a point where most people are going to start to think it's just going to keep going up forever, and then it's not, and then we're going to have a major bear market, okay? And we'll probably drop like 70% or something. Now, I don't think we'll drop as bad as prior bear markets. So one of the reasons is because, diminishing returns also has this sort of interesting addition or interesting component to it, is that you would also expect volatility to decrease to the downside over the macro scale. Not necessarily on smaller time frames, which is arguably decreasing as well, but when you talk about like annualized volatility of the asset class, you would expect it to decrease over the macro scale. And so if Bitcoin isn't going quite as parabolic as it used to because of the law of diminishing returns, then it would also make sense that the downside isn't going to be quite as bad, okay? So if the downside isn't quite as bad, what could the downside be? Well, what we could do is we can go measure what was the downside in prior bear markets, okay? What was that downside? So in this one, it was a very modest 94% drop. 94%. This one was 86%. Okay. This one here, 84%. So only slightly less than the one before it. Okay. So I know there's some people saying that this is the start of the bear market, right? And that we're going to have an 85% drop here. Okay, which I don't think is going to happen, but let me just show you what they're saying so you guys know. So I see some people calling for 10K, and they're saying we're going to have an 85% drop from this point. Look, anything's possible, but a 10K Bitcoin does not really make a whole lot of sense to me. And you know, if you look at this, let me delete some of this stuff so it's not. I feel like I'm like a madman trying to explain. Like, imagine if someone walked in on me and they saw this on the screen. So let's remove all that. A 10K Bitcoin does not make sense to me. And I don't say that as someone who like needs it to go up. I don't. I mean, if it goes to 10K, I would suck for a while, but we would get through it. But I don't think it's going to happen. I mean, even the 200-week moving average is almost at 20K. All right, it's already at 18.4K. So I don't even, what is the 300-week moving at? Because we had a wick to the 300-week in March. But there was pretty incredible circumstances then. The 300-week is already at 13K. So, you know, I don't really see 10K as a likely possibility. Now, I would argue that yeah, there could still be more downside in this move. So I'm not going to say that it has to pop up from this point, but I don't think we're going to go back down to these levels down here. What makes more sense to me, what makes the most sense to me is the theory of lengthening cycles playing out. And if we overlay it so that we can really look at what happened, getting a potential 70% correction, but not here necessarily, right? Not here. I mean, a 70% correction here would actually take us all the way down to 20K. And I know there's a lot of people calling for a 20K Bitcoin. Yeah, I mean, like, you know, if you're gonna ask me, is 20K possible? It's certainly possible. I think it's not the most likely scenario in my opinion. I think the most likely scenario is in fact a lengthened cycle, and you know, we do something like that, and then we drop 70%. So instead of dropping 70% from here down to say like, or 80% down to 15K or something, I think it would make a lot more sense if we dropped 70% from like, you know, starting from somewhere out over here. That's what I think would make the most sense. And you know, the reason, you know, I don't think 20K is going to happen. I don't. But the reason you can't discount it is primarily because at any time, any person in crypto for a long time would say that you have to always consider the 200-week SMA at least a possibility, right? It's at least a possibility. But even then, it's already at almost 20K, and it's moving up every single day. I mean, it's going to continue moving up. So if you sort of just extrapolate this somewhat dubiously, in fact, then by April, the 200-week SMA is probably going to be at $24,000-$25,000. So by, you know, potentially by the second quarter, maybe the third quarter, the 200-week SMA is going to be at 30K, right? So it's still moving up with time, which is a good thing. We want it to move up with time. And as you can see, the 200-week SMA has been a monotonically increasing function. So I don't think we're headed to the 200-week SMA now. I do think we will trend higher. But I will argue at the same time, we will go back to the 200-week SMA at some point later on in the cycle. It's my opinion, right? But I think that it's more likely that by the time we get to the 200-week SMA, I'm going to think it's going to... My thought is that it's going to be closer to 40 or 50K, right? By the time we get to the 200-week SMA. So then if lengthening cycle theory plays out, then, and you get something that looks like this, and we come knocking on the door of the prior all-time high for the third time, and we get a parabolic rally that takes us up, something like that, then maybe we drop back down to the 200-week moving average here. And then if we overlay, does it work with the regression bands? Let's, you know, if you think of it like that, maybe. I mean, again, it's maybe it's wishful thinking, right? Maybe it's wishful thinking, but you can imagine extending these regression bands out and then, potentially coming down back down into this region sometime in the distant future and then continuing on. It's one thing I can assure you is that the squiggly line I drew will not play out exactly how I drew it. Okay, it will not play out like that. But it is interesting because, for people that think that these cycles are super predictable, they're not, right? They're not. I mean, this is the very first time in history that Bitcoin went below the bull market support band after a major parabolic rally, bounced off the 50-week, and then held the 20-week as support. That's never happened before in prior cycles. Never. Every time that Bitcoin bounced off the 50-week, we always got rejected by the 20-week. Or if we didn't get rejected, it was because we got above it and then we just fell below it. And then the rest was history. So these market cycles are not as predictable in terms of the intra-cycle volatility as people think they are, right? They're certainly not nearly as predictable as people think they are. And arguably, now that you have more people looking at things like this, you have more people looking at indicators like this, it's almost like everything is, you could argue that people are sort of front-running things, right? So when we were up here, and we made several videos saying, look, guys, we're in the logarithmic regression band. Here we are, right? And what now, right? We came back down. We were in no man's land. We came back up and put in a new all-time high. So this market cycle is certainly keeping people on their toes, to say the very least, right? It's certainly keeping people on their toes. And we're just sort of in no man's land. We're going sideways in no man's land right now. It's also interesting because I know a lot of people that were accumulating over here, and they said the next time we hit the regression band, they'll definitely sell. And then we hit it, and they didn't take any profits, right? It's always one of those things that it's always an abstract concept, taking profits. Saying you're going to take profits and taking profits is an entirely different matter, okay? I imagine there's people here today that would say, well, if we ever hit the top of the regression band, I'll sell everything. And I would argue that there's going to be a lot of people that even in the event that we do something like this, they still won't sell, right? They still won't take profits. And that's fine if that's what they want to do. Some people just like to sit on it for the long term because I guess there's always a theoretic possibility that we just sort of go on some new trend and that we don't get that. I mean, again, I'm going to argue that it's still more likely that after a major blow off top, we would have a bear market, but certainly people are allowed to believe whatever they want. And there's always a chance that they could be right. We've talked a lot about Bitcoin here. If we pull up the corridor, if you guys want to know what the limitations are instantaneously based on this indicator, it says the lowest point to the downside would be 34K and the highest point to the upside is 129K. So those are currently the bounds based on this indicator, 34 up to 129. So pretty large range, of course, that you have to work with there. If we look at the regression rainbow, we came up to this gray line here. For us to even get back to that line, we would actually have to go to 93K, I believe. Yeah, 93, 94K. Let's say 93. Yeah, you can see it's 93. $93,000 to get to the same regression band that we made it to earlier this year. That's how high we'd have to go. Even though we went to these prices, you can see that, again, the regression bands are monotonically increasing functions. So something to consider as always. Another indicator that we've looked at before as well is this, let's see if I can find it. I think it's this one. This is an interesting indicator. It's the 100 week divided by the 200 week SMA. So if you pull up the 100 week and 200 week, and if we hide the noise, let's hide the noise. The noise is the price, right? So this is the 100 week SMA and the 200 week SMA. So this is what it looks like. So you can kind of see we get these, maybe you can call them like inflection points, right? Where they sort of come together and then they sort of move back part. I remember watching it. We actually have several videos on the channel when we were looking at the 100 week get close to the 200 week and noting that the last time that happened, we had a pretty sizable move to the upside. What's interesting, if you look at this indicator and see kind of where it is today, I think one of the things to keep in mind, the inflection points are not indicative of sort of these like bear market bottoms or market cycle tops, right? They're not indicative of them at all. In fact, what's actually more indicative would be the inflection point, the change in concavity. Okay, if you remember, convex functions from maybe your calculus days, these are probably the more important places to look. So if you are familiar with calculus, that would involve taking a time derivative of these functions, and then you would actually get, I actually did that in TradingView once, but then they updated it and it's not working, so I need to redo it. But it would involve taking the time derivative of this function. And the reason why that might be interesting is if you look at where we are at, say, the inflection point, where you change concavity and you change, let's say, like a convex function, that tends to be an interesting spot in the market. Okay, so we had one here at the end of 2015, and that ultimately led into a parabolic rally, right? This one, which arguably happened somewhere around either September 2017, October 2017, was fairly close to the all-time high, fairly close. And it was where you had some level of change in concavity between the 100-week SMA division of the 200-week SMA. And then this change in concavity from, again, if these convex functions, right? If you maybe remember some other terms like concave, was it concave down versus concave up? Another way to think about it, if you remember that from calculus, right? Again, this change in concavity here led to the next cycle. Okay, we got fooled though. It was a big fake out because it seemed like it was coming, and then we had the March 2020 drop, which in hindsight was probably the best thing that could have happened for Bitcoin, because ever since then it completely changed this. I mean, it completely changed everything. Dropping from 14K back down to $3,800, it washed everyone out, right? All the leverage traders at 14K that thought we were just going to go to 20K, they all just got wiped out. We all went all the way back down, more or less, to the prior all-time lows. Not quite, but we made it close to that level, and then we went up later on. It's kind of like what happened today again. I mean, we went 64K, 29K, back to 69K. Everyone thought we're going to go to 100K by the end of the year because of this 4-year cycle stuff, and which again we've always said is likely not the case. And look, they get wiped out again. All these leverage traders get wiped out again. All right, so we had one change in one change in concavity, 2, 3. This one's interesting, right? It's like, and we talked about this function earlier this cycle. Certainly, we talked about it over here. We talked about it on the channel over here when we hit this bottom, and now it's like, oh, they're on to us. They're on to our schemes, because now they're throwing all sorts of twists and turns our way. So you don't really get this, as smooth of a function anymore. But it should be still interesting to follow, because you sort of have this change in concavity here, where you could argue that there's at least one universe in the multiverse that perhaps we just came back down and did something like that. But then Bitcoin said, nope, we're going to keep going up, right? We're just going to keep going up. And it's an interesting spot, right? It's an interesting spot to be. Another thing to look at are what happens at the top, right? Where are we at the top? Well, at this middle point here, that tends to be the low of the bear market, okay? That tends to be the low of the bear market. So you can imagine that if this sort of slowly keeps increasing, something like, I mean, it's hard to know what's going to happen. I mean, right now the price is going down, so it's starting to sort of turn over a little bit. If we end up getting a lengthened cycle and it turns back up, and we do something like this for a while, and then we get this long rounded top like we did over there, then maybe this would be the next bottom of the next bear market, wherever that ends up being. I don't know what it's going to look like, right? I don't know how these averages are going to look. Again, they're going to be a function of the price over the next several years, and we don't know what those prices are. But rounded top up here, well, maybe not exactly, but somewhat came close to the, to that bear market bottom, right? Rounded top, close to the bear market bottom. So whenever that happens, okay, and you could argue that we were moving quickly towards it, and then we put it on pause for 4 months, moving quickly towards it. It's on pause again right now, right? I mean, if we don't put in new all-time highs, it's going to start going sideways again. Okay, and then maybe we'll move up again towards it, and then maybe we'll put in some long rounded top like this, and wherever. And by the way, these rounded tops can last a long time. Like from when you enter it, you could argue that's like the all-time high, right here. It's kind of where you enter that rounded top. The center point, sort of like that bear market bottom, and then changing concavity looks like it sets the new cycle. I don't know. I mean, this is obviously this is probably complete garbage, but it is what it is, right? It's just one more indicator. What are some other things? You guys have any questions? Make sure you guys subscribe if you're not subscribed. You guys need to, sorry, I kind of was in the zone there for a while. I don't really know what happened. You need to subscribe. We do have the premium list into the cryptoverse.com. Check it out if you want, or don't. But you can check that out if you want to get access to more stuff. KPN 5000 wants to know if I'll say hi. Yes, hi. Someone says, is the lengthening cycle when in 2022 will be the top? Could be in 2022, could be in 2023. I don't know yet. I would argue that it's not going to be at the beginning of 2022 if the cycle lengthens. Okay, when I first created the theory, or when I first started talking about it years ago, I said, look, it's probably not going to be in Q1 of 2022 either. It could be. I mean, I would say, I always said that Q1 of 2022 is a much more likely possibility than Q4 of 2021. But I would actually say Q2 of 2022 is more likely than Q1. And even then, Q3 of 2022 is more likely than Q2. So like if I were to draw like some like probability function, like probability distribution, where we said what's the likelihood of a market cycle peak if lengthening cycle theory is true, which we don't know yet, right? We don't know if it is yet. We have to wait and find out. I would say, and if this is like the probability, then, and we actually have a video on this. If you actually go back a couple years on the channel and look, basically this is what I drew. I said 2021 is somewhere over here. 2022 is probably like somewhere over here. 2023 is somewhere over here. Can't do this in order. And then, yeah, like 2024 is like way over here. So I always argue that 2021 is unlikely, 2024 is unlikely, probably going to be sometime in 2022 or 2023. But I think it's also somewhat foolish to say, oh, it's going to happen on a very specific date when right now we're still playing in the sandbox, right? Who cares, right? If it's true, it's some nebulous abstract date out into the future that we cannot possibly know now. So it's completely useless to sort of say that exactly when it's going to happen, because we don't even know if it's going to be true yet. We still have to wait and see if we put in new all-time highs. Once we put in new all-time highs, then we really have to start thinking, all right, are we going off the wristbands? Where are we on the market cycle ROI? Are we I would expect diminishing returns. So if we're going to expect diminishing returns in that sense, then it would make sense that it's not going to come immediate, or that we wouldn't go to 300K. Like, I don't think Bitcoin's going to make it to 300K. But I always said that, right? I've never wavered on that. Some people have, right? Some people say it's going to go to 300K, then they change it to something else. But I've never said we're going to go to 300K. I've never thought we were going to go to 300K this cycle. Something you have to keep in mind too is that the length here that these cycles have extended. This was a year and a half, my friends, right? This was about a year right here. So I think we still have a ways. Like I think we still have a ways, and um, time will tell, right? I don't have a crystal ball. I wish I did. I don't. But time will ultimately tell. And another question that people have asked me is the next. Let's suppose that if lengthening cycles is true, and we go into another mania phase, is it going to be a distribution phase or a blow off top? I'd like to think it's going to be a blow off top. I mean, I could be wrong about it. Believe it or not, I've been wrong about plenty of things in my life. But I'd like to think it's going to be a blow off top. And the reason is because there's probably going to be so many people thinking that they're going to have a long time to sell, right? Like they just think they're going to have a long time to sell, and they're probably not, right? They're probably not. Maybe one of the reasons we haven't had a blow off top is just because it's not the market cycle peak, right? Maybe that's one of the reasons. It's not the market cycle peak, and so every local top is sort of just like a long, sort of slow distribution phase rather than a major blow off top. So I don't know for sure. I mean, I certainly don't know for sure. I certainly did not expect a 4-month window where we traded at 60K and then fell back down to 30K at the time. I did think we were going to go down, but I didn't know exactly when it was going to happen. I mean, I said sometime over the summer, I think we're going to have a 3 to 6 month lull starting sometime, coming up relatively soon back then. But I didn't like I knew the day that it was going to happen. So, yeah, I mean, I think that time will tell, right? I mean, of course, time will tell. But this is what it looks like on a log scale. This is what it looks like on a linear scale. Okay, so pretty crazy to look at these cycles on a linear scale. Kind of makes you feel a certain way, right? Like cycle 1, cycle 2, cycle 3. Does anyone see cycle 4? It's this thing down here that is barely off the x-axis, right? That's cycle 4, my friends. Right? This is cycle 4. So, I mean, cycle 1, cycle 2, cycle 3. What's funny is once upon a time, cycle 3 probably looks similar to cycle, it looks similar to cycle 4, right? When it was at this stage. Compared to the prior cycles, you probably, you could have looked at this and said, well, cycle 1, cycle 2. And if you're looking at it, somewhere, let's say somewhere back in January of 2017 or December of 2016, you're probably looking at it like, where's cycle 3, right? It's just barely off the x-axis. What's it doing? It's not doing anything. And then there it went, right? And then it had its parabolic rally. And then here we are. We're not doing anything. We're just playing, or we're in our sideways movement between 30 and 60K. We're playing in the damn sandbox for half the year, it feels like. Where's cycle 4? It's barely to be seen on this scale. So we'll see what happens. But it would certainly be fairly absurd if if this is all we got. But look, I mean, again, the time, it's sort of like, you got to start thinking over here that, well, it took so much longer, and then over here it took so much longer again. So there's probably a lot of people that lost hope. Again, probably going to be a lot of people that lose hope, and by the time it happens, probably no one's going to expect it to happen. That's what I think. All right, back to log scale. All right, what questions do you guys have? Someone says pi cycle top. We're nowhere near a pi cycle top right now, because you're basically looking at when these two cross, and I mean they're just simply nowhere close to crossing. And in fact, you will not see them cross this cycle again unless we get a long consolidation phase. If we get a longer consolidation phase, then the green line here will then start to come down, and it'll give time for the orange line to sort of like oscillate and then maybe catch back up. And then by the time the green line maybe goes up again, then they could potentially cross later on. But they will not cross this cycle again unless we get some type of longer consolidation where we don't just immediately break up higher, but it takes us a while to do it. If you're not subscribed, make sure you subscribe. If you haven't given the video a thumbs up, give the video a thumbs up. Someone says they think Bitcoin could go to 42K if we break 46. Yeah, I mean, look, I'm not saying it's going to go to 42K, but we did go there last week. So to say that it can't happen is also kind of ridiculous. So yeah, I mean, 42K is certainly a possibility. We cannot discount it. Even 40K could be a possibility. So yeah, I mean, it's really hard to know, right? I mean, it's hard to know exactly what the local bottom would be. Someone says if I give them a thumbs up, they'll give me one. Here's a thumbs up. What are the best indicators that I use? I mean, I just showed a lot of them to you. Not all of them, but I just showed a lot of them. Someone wants to play chess. I don't know that we're going to play chess tonight. What's my rating? It's around 1700. Recently, it's been mostly between 17 to 1800 on chess.com. On Lichess, it would be closer to like 2000 to 2100 because the elos are inflated over there. But yeah, it's 17 to 1800 on chess.com. How does the 2019 bull run factor into the whole market cycle phenomenon? Well, it's interesting that you ask that because again, the 2019 move, we saw a similar move if you go back 2 cycles ago. There's obviously the discussion of it potentially being an extended version of 2013. This is what I've said. Remember, I've always said that if it emulates 2013, it's a stretched out version of it, right? And just to show it again in case you missed it, we're gonna pull 2013 over. And you see that first run up that 2013 cycle had. That's what I've argued that could be seen as the 2019 move, right? They even went to a very similar ROI from the cycle bottom, right? A very similar ROI in a relatively short period of time. But what's interesting is when we talk about it being an extended version of 2013, potentially, then if you extend 2013, you sort of see that this looks a lot similar, right? It's just, I mean, obviously you can't take these fractals or whatever you want to call them to the bank, but you can imagine why we might call it something like that. It's not an exact match by any stretch of the imagination, but hopefully you can kind of see what I'm talking about there. It's hard to make these exact, of course, but you get the idea. Also, by the way, if it is an extended version of 2013, it will experience way less returns. It will not follow that because it would otherwise it would go to like $2 million this cycle, which I don't think so. I think Bitcoin would be lucky to make it to a tenth of $2 million this cycle. So 200K this cycle would be absolutely incredible for Bitcoin. to make it 2. So no, you cannot line fractals up and assume that they're going to repeat exactly. A lot of people do that for some reason and say that, oh well, it went up 100x last cycle, it's going to do that this cycle too. Like most of those have not played out at all. Okay, so be careful about assuming that it has to play out exactly. Generally, I think it's better to assume that whatever you saw in previous cycles, expect a diminished version of it in future cycles. Someone says, doesn't it seem like we're forming a head and shoulders pattern? First of all, I would say that I think head and shoulders discussion should be reserved for shampoos and not navigating the cryptoverse. But if you want to talk about head and shoulders, I mean, everyone and their moms were also calling for a head and shoulders over here. And then, I mean, look how that played out. So, look, I mean, if people want to call this another head and shoulders, if it comes down and then bounces up, be my guest, right? Be my guest. You can call it whatever you want. I don't really care what you call it. But I think that there's a lot of evidence to suggest that those patterns do not play out. Like a lot of the time. They do not play out a sufficient amount of the time for you to take them to the bank. Okay, because they're not going to cash them in there, I guarantee you that. So I would not put too much faith in the idea that these head and shoulder things are going to play out. Could I talk about XRP? What's there to really talk about? I know some people are married to XRP for some reason. Look, I mean, maybe if they get the SEC stuff figured out one day, it'll go up. But until then, what's the point? I mean, like, you just look at it and just bleeds against Ethereum. So it's like, who cares if it goes? I mean, my thinking on it is like it'll probably go up at some point. But who cares? I mean, it's 94% down against Ethereum. So like, it would have to pump it'd have to pump like 1,700% against ETH just to get back to break even from the beginning of the cycle, from December 2018. It would have to pump 1,700% against Ethereum just to get back to break even. So it's hard to get super excited about these coins. I don't know why so many people are so attached to them. And honestly, I mean, I hope XRP holders make money. I mean, I don't have a problem with you guys making money. If you're knee deep in XRP, then maybe it'll come through in the clutch one day if they get these things sorted out. But would I be buying XRP on the event that it's going to be settled next week? I wouldn't. That doesn't mean you shouldn't. If you do, I hope you time it amazingly. Okay? The last time I bought XRP was back in late 2020, in fact. And I bought it at 53 cents, and then I bought it again, and then I bought it at 53 cents, and then the market, the XRP dumped because the SEC lawsuit came out. Then I bought it at 36 cents, and it dumped even more. And then it went up, right? I mean, so it's not like it did that bad. But again, relative to a lot of other cryptocurrencies, it was awful. It's not hard to pick a crypto to go up 2 or 3x in a bull market. In fact, if you're picking cryptocurrencies that only go up 2 or 3x in a bull market, then you actually are talented in picking cryptocurrencies that don't do much, because a lot of cryptocurrencies did a lot more than go up 2 or 3x in a bull market. So, look, I mean, I don't really talk about XRP that much, but one of the reasons is it's hard to get super excited about cryptocurrencies that only ever bleed against Ethereum, and that's what we've seen happen with XRP. Can I talk about Ethereum? Yeah, I mean, look, I think Ethereum still looks great. I mean, what more can I say? I mean, I think it's just in long reaccumulation. And I know that's kind of like a boring thing to say. It's an easy thing to say, but that's just what it is. I mean, I warned you guys at the beginning of the cycle, there's going to be phases where Ethereum could just go sideways for up to a year at a time, right? A year at a time. So if it can go sideways for a year at a time, why do people get upset when it goes sideways for a year at a time, between 2 to 4K for the most part? Okay, I mean, I still think it looks great over the for the duration of the cycle. You know, could we come back down and then go back up? Sure, or we could just go back up here. I still think it looks relatively good, and will hopefully continue to do well as we continue on into 2022. Someone says, yeah, going sideways equals 100% gain. Yeah, but it also equaled a 50% loss at some point too, right? I mean, it went from 2K to 4K, and then it went back down to 2K, right? I mean, so look, in crypto, yes, right? I mean, for whatever reason, this is just the way it is. But yes, in crypto, I would consider that to just be going sideways. And you know, if you have a problem with it, I would say don't take it up with me, take it up with the data, because I would still go look at this and say the prior moves of Ethereum last market cycle, when we said that it's going to go sideways for long periods of time, when I said that, I was basing it off these prior moves over here, where it went sideways for a year, and also during that same time was capable of bleeding upwards of 72%. So when you say that it's like a, you know, that a 2x is not going sideways, I would disagree. I would say yes, in crypto a 2x is going sideways if you're here for a 40x, right? I mean, if you're buying Ethereum at $100 in 2019 or 2020, it's not like you got overly excited about it going to $200, right? That's 2x. It's a 2x on your money, but you expect those returns because you're also going up against the fact that you could also wake up one morning and your entire portfolio could be down 50%. It's all about your risk-adjusted returns. And so many people are scared off by crypto because of how much volatility there can be to the downside that they ignore the upside, right? They completely ignore the upside, and all they ever care about is the fact that Bitcoin sometimes goes down 70 or 80%. They don't care about the fact that it still is up over, you know, millions of percent since inception. They don't care about that. All they care about is that, well, there's sometimes it goes down, right? Sometimes it goes down, therefore it's not a good investment. So that's sort of the idea. So yeah, I would say for me, a range of 2x is more or less sideways. Okay, and if you overlay that bar pattern onto the current cycle, you can see that there are a lot of similarities. Not that it's going to play out exactly in the same way. I certainly don't expect Ethereum to shoot up to $100,000 or anything this cycle, but I would expect it to potentially stay range bound for a while and then hopefully continue on the cycle. Right, it sort of slipped there at the end, but you know, hopefully continue on the cycle, something like that maybe. Okay, so that's what I'm thinking is a good potential outcome. All right, guys, it's getting late here. I gotta get going. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe, give the video a thumbs up. We do have a Telegram channel. If you guys want to check that out, the alerts channel, I'll post it here in the chat. You guys can go join that if you want. And then they also do have the premium list if you want to know how I am navigating these markets into the Cryptoverse.com. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the stream. Like the video, click the bell icon. You guys